The northern quarter was full of markets and trade. The newest goods shipped from across the sea and from all over Stromer. Many stalls, shops, and merchants traded in the bazaar on top of viaducts and towering buttresses that were recently built for the recent expansion of the merchants of Psipolis. Merchants have a tricky place in the social hierarchy in Stromer's hierarchy. Most of them travel far and wide for a sale, and that often means that they are seen as outsiders and not trustworthy. Strangers everywhere and home nowhere. But their products and money are wanted, especially for rare products not found in Cipoli, such as raisins, silk, and even spices. A lot of fairly wealthy merchants supported the Patriarch during the War of Unification, and because of that fact, they were awarded land, and with their land, their wares exploded in both quantity and quality. Suddenly, Cipoli had the beginnings of companies and monopolies, rather than just local producers and traveling merchants. Suddenly, you weren't just buying beer from the bar, who bought the beer from the brewer, who bought hops from growers, who had to grow both hops and food to survive. Now the bar that sold you the beer had it made by a brewer who worked for the bar, and the hops were made by a farm that the bar owned, who could now afford to focus on only growing hops. This led to lower prices throughout the city and more consistent quality, albeit lower quality. However, it also drove many smaller merchants out of the bazaar. Suddenly, if you're not brewing beer that could be cheaper than what an oligarch could produce, you weren't making beer in the bazaar anymore. So those markets were moved elsewhere, to the streets below the viaducts. There was always a market beneath the viaducts. Flesh markets, taverns, brickworks, and other professions that were necessary for a city to function, but are considered unseemly. In the last 5 years, as the bazaar above grew, so did the shadow market beneath it. The temple to the goddess of love, once built on the shore of an artificial river created via aqueduct outside of the city, was left beneath the viaducts and the streets above as the aqueduct was redirected to supply water above, and the temple of love below dried up. As the bazaar expanded, as the money increased, and as the oligarchs grew wealthier, love grew weaker. As the shadow market grew from a place where taboo goods and services were bought into the only market most of the working class could afford, love grew weaker, and it is here where Adansi would have to make her way down below. The market closest to the Patriarch's palace was a boring market to Adansi. Fancy clothes, holy water, various trinkets that claimed to be historical artifacts like a thumbprint of the Patriarch in clay, or other items that bore Adansi, but was well sought out by others who wanted to feel close to divinity in the material world, not realizing what it takes to be divine. Further from the Patriarch's palace, the market got more interesting with food and drinks. Wine mixed with water sold for children, tea with honey, coffee with some rare sugar, and even an extremely rare drink only sold to adult men: chocolate. Medieval societies like Cipoli couldn't really afford to have non-alcoholic drinks served cold to people. Diseases ran rampant in cold water without pasteurization, chlorine, nor other means of cleaning the water, meant that water was less than helpful. So that often meant that drinks either had a small percentage of alcohol or had to be served hot. One may notice that some drinks, like milk, were exceptionally rare on Primeval, but that makes sense when you realize how rare mammals are on Primeval. That left the only source of Primeval was humans, rodents, and some marsupials. So unless you were willing to fist fight a kangaroo, face down a saber-toothed cat, milk rats by the thousands, or sell your own milk, the milk wasn't being sold in the market. And yet Adansi passed by a few different stalls that promised the extremely rare luxury of milk, as Adansi continued to look for what she needed. Finally, near the center of the bazaar, she could find her way down. Not far from the crossroads where she felt most at home, she found one of several sea clay stairs that led down to the land beneath the viaducts. Unlike the eastern quarter, access to the land beneath the viaduct wasn't restricted, but most people didn't like heading to that part of the city unless you lived there or if you had business there. Adansi descended the stairs, and finally on the bottom was the Shadow Market. Despite the name, it was actually fairly well lit during this time of day. Stalls were set around the supports of the viaduct. However, there were a few drains on the streets that everyone avoided walking, almost instinctively, and were stalls you didn't want to go near. In a place as crowded as this, if everyone is avoiding an area, there's usually a very good and very unhygienic reason. Most of the wealthier homes of Psipolis had internal plumbing, but not all of the homes did, and when you live on the viaduct, it's just easier to dump it out of the window than it is to try and dispose of your chamber pots properly. And yet, every once in a while, someone walking on the street was splashed by people who tried to cut through those empty areas, hoping that they wouldn't get unlucky. Still, as Adansi passed by the official stalls selling clothes, food, drinks, toys, animals, and weapons. As busy as this market was, Adansi did not see the goddess of love, nor any other divine being in this part of the city. So Adansi traveled to the oldest part of the northern quarter. She passed by stall after stall, and she made it to the old taverns and inns. Some of them were as they appeared, some of them were more than they appeared, and others were less than they appeared. Deep under the viaducts, where it was cold and even during midday it was still dark, Adansi found what she was looking for. It was there that Adansi found the remnants of the Temple of Love. Carved from marble, in the center of the dais, is a statue carved to resemble the goddess of love. Before the temple was abandoned, it was a beautiful place. Braziers hanging from columns that lit the inside of the temple, even at night. The ceiling was painted to resemble a night sky. The statue was once surrounded by water that was redirected from the aqueduct. Water used in rituals and blessings, made to resemble the goddess's river. The statue was once covered in gold leaf and then painted over to resemble a person in perfect detail. Now, though, the temple resembled something from the pumpkin house rather than a holy place. The ceiling was covered in smoke, so only a few of the brightest stars could be seen. The braziers were all old, and many of them were knocked onto the ground. The gold was all gone, the aqueduct was sealed, so the pool around the statue was dry and dusty. The statue barely resembles the goddess of love, and sitting before the statue of the goddess of love was a woman. A middle-aged woman with a lot of makeup on her face, with a white dress with gold on the fringes, and she wore silver on her fingers, neck, and in her piercings, both in her ears and in her eyebrows. Adansi nodded at this. Ear piercings in Psipolis were very common. However, eyebrow piercings were extremely rare, except for those who did a lot of per diem work. Adansi recognized the goddess of Stromerian love, as Adansi did a playful bow to the goddess. O great goddess of silver, gold, rivers, love, and fertility, wife to justice, equal to her husband, equal to her king, I greet you on this day, Adansi said as she slid her left foot backwards, bowed her head forward at her waist, and her right hand back with her left hand behind her back, a form of bowing that was not used in Primeval, but Adanse was certain that the goddess would understand what Adanse was trying to do. O mighty Adanse, the Marquess of Madness, goddess of Lockhart, granddaughter of the dragon, here I have no silver, no gold. The river is dried up. There is no love here. My husband is not here. I am no queen here. So here I am really no one, and I am nobody. You should not be here, wandering wanderer, Oshun said to Adanse, as Adanse tilted her head to ask, Well, I wander where I will. I wonder when I will, Adanse said, laughing at her wordplay, while Oshun only turned away from Adanse, facing her own statue. Just leave me here. Let me be buried in my temple as Psipolis grows. Let what I stand for be buried where I lie, and when it is buried, maybe I can forget when I am completely forgotten, Oshun said, while Adanse asked a single question, and every question in a single word that meant every word. Why? The goddess of Lockhart asked the goddess of love. Oshun turned to Adanse, and she saw that Adanse was genuinely curious. They were both human, once, and they were gods now, both representing an aspect of life often romanticized and thrown aside. Maybe Adanse would listen when Shango did not. So, Oshun sat on a remaining bench, and Adanse sat next to Oshun, as Oshun began to tell a story. During the War of Unification, many relationships were formed and broken. I was quite busy. Many men left for war, leaving behind their wives, their fiancés, their betrothed, their loves, and their friends. And yet, I still slipped amongst them. Soldiers who left far from home would go to distant villages, towns, and cities. And the men did what men often do. They got lonely. Usually it was lust more than it was love. The profession of prostitution thrives in war almost as well as the war itself. The soldiers didn't care about long-term consequences, about getting the women pregnant. Where they were stationed, some married the women they impregnated. Most, on the other hand, simply left. Either they were stationed elsewhere or they left in the night, leaving behind nearly an entire generation of children who would never know their father. Unification took nearly 10 years, so there would be young men who left their families to fight for the patriarch. Young men who had younger siblings who weren't of fighting age yet. So when the younger siblings grew older, they would grow disillusioned with the patriarch's pleasant little war and would fight against the patriarch. Brother fighting brother, sister fighting sister, father fighting son, families torn apart, clans shattered, tribes dissolved, nations broken apart and put back together into something different. The War of Unification brought a continent together by tearing families apart. The battles weren't just fought out on the fields, forests, and forts. They were also fought in the heart, hearth, and home. There were so many stories of families dying overnight for unification. Families that before the war never would have dreamed of causing harm to each other were wiped out by their own blood and their own love. I was there, Adansi, watching as mothers who had no idea how they were going to feed their children make the decision to kill one child to feed the others. I was there every single time. I was there watching my mother butcher my sister to make sure I was fed, and I was only happy to not be starving. I was there drawing the knife across my daughter's neck. I was there feeling the sting of the knife on my neck, feeling only love to my mother, and never understanding why I couldn't breathe. I was there for every heartbreaking choice that mothers had to make to keep their families alive for another harsh winter. I was there when mothers had to smother their infants because that was a kinder death than letting them slowly starve. I was there when desperate parents decided death was better than letting their children suffer, all in the name of love. I was there as children watched their parents die of disease, too young to leave their homes, too young to understand what was happening, too young to care for themselves. I watched as these children starved on their rotting parents' laps, refusing to leave their sleeping parents because they loved their parents too much, and all they understood is that their parents wouldn't let anything bad happen to them. I was there for every betrayal and broken heart, and there was so much betrayal during the unification. I watched as a woman let in an invading army because she fell in love with an officer, enamored by how he looked from the distance, and they communicated through notes snuck through the wall. She fell in love with his looks and his writing, and she let him in one night. Him and his entire army. I was there, inside of her heart, as the city burned around her. She didn't care that her city burned. She didn't care that her friends and family were being marched out of the city in chains. She didn't even notice as she embraced the officer, the man of her dreams, as they slept together that night as the city burned and was ransacked. The very next day, the clothes were burned in front of her, and anything of value was taken by the officer. She was marched out of the city in those chains to the officer's tent, where she was kept with dozens of other slaves, all women who fell in love with the handsome officer from a distance, all of whom let him into the city, all of whom were enslaved by this one officer, all with the full knowledge and enthusiastic support of his wife. I wasn't just the woman's misguided love. I was also the officer's desire for power and control. The lust for power and women in his heart was something I felt. I felt the rush he got from imagining all of the cruel things he would do to those women. His wife's smile from watching her husband bring home a new slave was plastered on my face, and I felt how they consummated lust and love for each other, and it sickened me. I was once a queen, a mortal woman who loved the god of justice, and who in death joined him as a goddess. When I became the goddess of love, I imagined I would be there for so many different romantic movements. I imagined I would be there for every rose gifted. I would be there for every wedding. I would be there for every I love you and every goodbye. And I was, but I was also there for so many different heartbreaking and cruel moments. I was there when a man said I love you to his wife, only to have her never say it back to him. I was there for so many unrequited loves. I was there for the stalkers who were in love with their victims. I was a part of every pure act of love. I was a part of every act of lust. I was there for so much death and pain, but I could tell myself it was worth it, that there was more good than evil, that there was more light than darkness. When the War of Unification came, I only saw the worst of everyone, over and over. I watched love poison people. I watched so much tragedy, and it all ended the same terrible way because of love. I don't want to be a part of that anymore. When the Patriarch commissioned new temples for the gods, my temple was considered for only a minute before it was left behind. Oshun has a place in the Patriarch's new world. War is to be honored and celebrated. Justice is to exist as theater. Love, though, love is to be forgotten and buried, and I deserve to be forgotten and buried with it. Adansi, you are a goddess of children. You will never know what it is like when what you represent hurts you. You will never see darkness. You will never know pain like this. You are a pure goddess, and you should leave this place and just forget that I was ever here. Adansi let Oshun finish her story, and at Oshun's final words, Adansi tilted her head and laughed at Oshun's final statement. You believe that I have never seen darkness? You believe that I have never been hurt? You believe that I have never known pain like that? You think being a goddess of children means that I have never been hurt? Oshun, you do not have to compare your suffering to mine to know that you have been in pain. You do not need to treat me like some untouched glass figurine. I have seen pain, Oshun. I have seen a child panic while their family dies of plague, confused about what to do as they offer comfort to their dying family. I have seen children who suffer every day, constantly forgiving their abusers, constantly loving their abusers, and drawing greater comfort from the monsters in the closet than from the angels above. I have held the hand of a young girl who is so young that she still needs to hold her dad's hand to cross the street as she gives birth. I have held a hurt child to my chest who was burned badly enough that she's scarred for the rest of her life, comforting her because she couldn't cry out, of fear of causing more wrath. I have walked children to the sunless lands, some so young that they never had a chance to open their eyes, who never had a chance to be named. Some who are so old that their legacies were like mountains, immeasurable and immense, who had watched thousands of sunrises and only one sunset. I have walked children from the sunless lands to the soulful lands. Trust me, even one of those treks is far worse than carrying thousands of infants to the sunless lands. I have watched so many plunge into pandemonium. I have watched young heroes who were destined to fly, fall. I have watched villains who decided the best thing to do with their own trauma was to spread it, like a virus. I have seen bullies become villains. I have watched hopefuls become heroes. I have seen children be so much stronger than they ever had to be, for no other reason than someone had to be. I have seen victims become survivors. I have seen every tragedy and hardship a person can go through, and I have seen it suffered by children who lack wisdom and experience to handle it, and yet they are still asked to suffer it. I have seen so much through the eyes of so many children, many of whom didn't have the words to explain what was happening to themselves, let alone to the parents around them. You see me as a child, so you assume that I cannot comprehend pain? Every pain, every suffering, from the smallest scrape to the worst war crime committed against children of all ages, is a pain that I have felt. All of that is a pain that I have comforted and tried to help them heal. I don't always succeed, but I try every time. Yet I still seek out joy. I still seek out the helpers. I still seek out the heroes. I still seek out the smiles. I still seek out the hope. I still seek out the love. Even in the deepest darkness, I find light. Ocean, you have seen suffering and pain, and you have my sympathy for it. But you will not have my sympathy for giving up. You were a queen before you were a goddess. You married a god as a human, and after death you remained his bride. A husband who loves you, someone who respects you and your wisdom so much he asks for all to speak to you as they would to him. And you give up? Olokun still is with old sailors, even if he isn't allowed in his temple. He still walks among the sailors. She still swims in the waters of the sea, and she still shares bounty and life with the continent. Ogun lives with the veterans and the refugees, offering hope and doing everything in his power to help them. He is still fighting for them with a hammer and anvil by putting down his axe and his guard dino. Your husband still fights for justice, even without you by his side. Do you doubt for a moment that he loves you? Adansi asked, only for Oshun to shake her head. She was shocked that Adansi was acting this way. She did not expect the young girl to have so much of her mother's spirit inside of her. So you know he loves you. He sees you as his equal, and yet he still fights for justice. Even without your help, he fights. And you have given up because of pain? Do you think giving up your role eases their pain at all? Adansi asked Ocean, who thought about it for a moment before she responded. No. So whose pain are you easing? Adansi asked, only for Ocean to look away, unable to answer the question. Which did answer the question. You do it to ease your own pain, but it doesn't lessen, does it? It festers, it ferments, it fallows, it furrows, and it feels. Doing nothing about the injustice of the world doesn't fix the injustice. It doesn't keep it from happening. It doesn't protect you from it. The only thing it protects you from is the joy and all the good your role is. You've trapped yourself in darkness to avoid blinding yourself with the light, which only leaves you blind anyway. Being a god doesn't just mean witnessing what you embody. It doesn't just mean being a part of it, but making a choice in a million little ways, ways so subtle People question if you were ever there at all. What does that mean? Oshun asked Adansi, as Adansi removed a pack of cards from her pocket, and she showed Oshun many different images and memories that Adansi had seen. A young child is afraid of the monster in their closet, so they can't sleep. So you make their teddy bear just a little warmer, a little softer, squeeze it a little closer so the child can sleep, and as they grow and they face other monsters, they remember that warmth and that comfort to guide them through. You see another child in chains who desires to be free. You give them a weak link that they can break. Make their kidnappers sleep a little deeper that night so they can be free. Or, in your example earlier about the woman slipping notes to her handsome captain, have him switch the note intended for his wife to this woman, so that way she will see his true plans that he intended to share with his wife. Oshun turned from the statue to the blocked-up river. A few drops of water began to seep through the blocked-up aqueduct. How do you know you're doing enough? It's too easy to drown a city to put out one fire, and it's far too easy to feel powerless. Oshun asked Adansi, who nodded, and she answered. To the child afraid of the monster in the closet, that bear is more than a flooded river. To the woman enslaved by her lover, a single note of warning is louder than the clearest alarm bell. Sometimes all you can offer someone is a hug, company, and a promise to hear their story. It doesn't seem like much to us, but to so many who have had nothing, that is worth far more than their world. The acknowledgement that they are important and that they matter brings peace to them, and it can inspire so much, and it offers comfort in their last moments. Adansi told Oshun, who was now staring at the small stream starting to trickle around her statue. How do you know that works? Oshun asked Adansi, who shrugged. It worked on you, Adansi said simply, which this time brought a laugh to Oshun, as she smiled for the first time in a long time. Tears flowed from her eyes, as clear and fresh as the river around her statue. Even with the pain and gold removed, the statue looked a little more regal, a little more divine, a little more inspiring. I will head to the southern quarter to meet with my husband. You can join me if you want, big sister, Oshun offered to Adansi, who shook her head, enjoying the little metaphor. They weren't literal sisters, but Adansi was a goddess a lot longer than Oshun had. I will make my own way. I have to wander and wonder, and I want to watch the river for a while longer, Adansi told Oshun, who nodded as she began her trek to the southern quarter, as Adansi watched the river water gently flow around Oshun's statue. A bit of beauty in the darkness, a bit of hope in the hopelessness, light in the darkness. Adansi watched it as her own tears fell from her eyes to join the river below. She cried with her voice as she cried many unfallen tears, some hers, some Oshun's, most belonging to so many others who never had a chance to be mourned, not by themselves, not by others. So all of that unmourned pain, tragedy, was mourned by Adansi that afternoon. It was well after sunset when she got back up to continue her journey.